Throughout the course of Tekken 7's lifespan, there have been singular buffs and nerfs that have completely broken the community in half and have caused massive controversy, overshadowing literally everything else in the patch notes at times. So today, I want to talk about what I believe to be the 7 most controversial changes in Tekken 7. Before we begin this list, let's establish a few things right off the bat. I will not be including moves that were broken or controversial upon launch. So for example, anything from Leroy Vanilla Season 3 is not going to be in this list because he came as that when we first were introduced to him. Same with FAHKUMRAM, with moves like his Standing 3, for example, will also not be in this list. I will be talking about moves or characters that have changed during a patch note, whether it is still in the game or not, and kind of talk about how controversial they were and how much they changed the meta of the game throughout the lifespan of Tekken 7. Lastly, there isn't exactly an order to this. I tried to put an order to this, and also because we're only talking about 7 specific things here, there is a lot of things I am not going to be mentioning in this video, so let us know in the comments if there was any big controversial ones you remember from back in the day that were not mentioned in this video. And before we get on to the first one, I kind of wanted to make this video so when Tekken 8 ends as a franchise and doesn't get any more updates, just to see the controversy side by side and which game really was worse. Are we going through the worst times of Tekken now, or have we had it worst in the past? Both these games are going to outlive any other game in the franchise, so it's going to be very interesting to see how Tekken 8 plays out and to compare it when it's all over. And that this video, when I made it, I realized I only talked about buffs. So if there's a interested group of people who want to see the nerfs, let me know in the comments and I can take a look into that. But I will tell you, buffs typically outweigh in controversy over nerfs. Not to say that there isn't for Tekken 7. In 7th place, we have Paul's Forward 1+4. Season 1 Paul was a powerhouse of a character and was greatly underestimated with how strong he was, only really being discovered to be super broken later after Season 1 when people went back and took time to really look at him. However, Season 2 Paul was rather interesting because it was technically the weakest version of Paul ever, as Paul mainly got nerfs in Season 2. However, they gave him one particular buff that even to this day, I still scratch my head as to why the fuck they would have ever given him this buff. In Season 2, there was a buff to Forward 1+4 that gave a knockdown follow-up afterwards. And yes, this follow-up could be Death Fist. So a move that went from only a small chunk of damage and a non-wall splatting knockdown basically went to one of the most obnoxious evasive moves in the game. Keep in mind, this was only -14. So being able to get a Death Fist follow-up after a mid knockdown and getting a follow-up afterward is just beyond disgusting. And crazy of all, this stayed all the way up till the end of Season 3. This was extraordinarily toxic, and it was definitely fun to spam and fuck around with if you were the Paul player. However, this really didn't change the meta of the game or do anything that drastic, and no one really talked about it that much. Everyone kind of just put up with it because Paul, at the end of the day, while he definitely was at his prime in Tekken 7, he still didn't get a lot of competitive representation like you would think, even though he was definitely the best he ever was in Tekken 7. Next on the list is Bob's Up Forward 4. Now this is an interesting move because while it is definitely a concerning one, it was a little overhyped with how problematic it actually ended up being. For those of you who don't know, Bob was classically a nightmare character and was considered the best Mishima back in Tekken 6 for literally just doing everything better than the Mishimas. So in Tekken 7, he was not only power crept, but he really just didn't have anything special or have any real reason to play him at all. However, there was an argument to play Bob a lot more in Season 4 when he got a new move which was Up Forward 4, and this acted as his 15 frame launcher. Now you see, what quote unquote made Bob balanced back then was he did not have a 15 frame launcher, mainly because his tool set was super well rounded and versatile. So adding a 15 frame launcher would, by that logic, make him OP again. However, he still didn't get that much competitive play, and even with this buff, you really didn't see Bob at all. And I think it's mainly because he was just power crept up the wazoo, especially when you had characters like Cooney, Akuma, Geese, Marduk, heck, even characters like Paul could be seen more in the competitive meta than Bob, with really only Uslan during Evo showing the most love for Bob. Now let's talk about Devil Jin's back to one string. Now this one's a little tricky to explain, but not impossible. Back to 1 was classically a high damaging yet very inconsistent wall combo, doing some of the highest wall damage in the game during Tekken 7's lifespan. However, due to its inconsistency, you never saw it used that much. That all changed during the first patch of Season 4, where the second hit was delayed by 1 frame. This 1 frame of a difference was almost meta-defining for Devil Jin, as it now made him have one of the highest damaging wall combos in the game extremely consistently. And keep in mind, during this season, a lot of characters lost wall combo damage. So this really took Devil Jin to the next level, which is something he really did not need at all, considering he was already a very top tier character at this time. However, despite this extremely toxic buff to Devil Jin, it was rather short-lived, as in a later patch, one of the last patches to the game, not only would Devil Jin lose a ton of damage on this back to 1, but he would also lose up forward 4, which was once one of the most scary moves in the game, and turned into one of the most laughable moves in the game, which is just kind of funny if you ask me. Next up is Marduk's up forward 1-2. Now, I personally hate this move with a fiery passion, despite playing Marduk quite a bit back in the day. However, this move didn't really get noticed by many people, and it's mainly because the devil is in the details, and was something I think both the players and developers did not even realize. But before we get into up forward 1-2, I need to quickly explain how Marduk worked back in the day. Marduk was an Oki god and did insane amounts of damage from the smallest of counter hits. However, one of his biggest weaknesses was having no good answers for 12 to 13 frame moves, specifically from standing, as he had to rely on down forward 4-2, which was rather stubby in its range and sometimes would be a 14 frame move, making it rather unreliable. This would all change with up forward 1-2. This move comes out in 12 frames, does 34 damage, and is +6 on hit, and leaves the opponent crouching. Now, right off the bat, that takes Marduk from having no good answer for 12 to 13 frame moves to having one of the best 12 frame punishers in the game. Keep in mind, being +6 with Marduk and your opponent crouching is a dream situation for Marduk. You can't even interrupt down forward 1 or any of his throw mix-ups. So it's pretty much whatever Marduk wants to fucking do in this situation. But that wasn't even the most insulting part. It wasn't the fact that it was one of the best punishers in the game, or the fact that it did way above average damage for a move of this nature. No, it was the fact that you had to input it from an up forward input. This means you can do the move from crouching. Why is this such a monumental problem? Well, let's say you're Kazuya and you do down back 4. Typically, you're going to be eating an 11 frame punish, around 16 to 20 damage and maybe 2 to 3 frames on average. Against Marduk, you're now eating 34 damage, +6, and in crouching. Now do you see the problem? This was almost meta-defining for Marduk, as it turned some matchups for other characters into an absolute nightmare when they fought Marduk, almost to a point of being unplayable to an extent. And worst of all, Marduk got away with it scot-free. as while Marduk was definitely a high tier character, he was seen just not enough to be nerfed enough by the developers and wasn't complained enough, believe it or not, to really get any notable nerfs, as shown in numerous patch notes where pretty much the worst nerf he ever got was a nerf to his rage drive, losing 10 points of damage. But outside of that, Marduk got away with complete murder like Zafina did. Next up is Steve's second rage drive. Steve is a rather interesting character because he was pretty much viable throughout the entirety of Tekken 7. However, during Season 1, he was still very well rounded, but had one fatal problem, and it was that he basically had no rage drive game, similar to Law, who kinda had a rather useless rage drive. Steve wasn't completely useless, but it was very situational and only really had any use at the wall and was kind of just a goofy meme at the end of the day. That would change completely during Season 2 when they decided to give his down forward 1+2 a rage drive variation. Not only does this move have a shit ton of range, but it became one of the fastest launchers in the game and one of the best rage drives in the game, as it was plus on block and came out extremely fast, basically making it the best whiff punisher in the entire game. Long story short, if Steve was in rage, you never whiffed under any circumstances, period. And this never really got nerfed, so Steve kind of got away with this one, but he really wasn't that much of a problem in the meta, so it's not the end of the world here, but a very meta-defining move for Steve, indeed. Feng Wei's down forward for 3. Now, this is another very interesting buff. And Feng in general is an extremely interesting case of never underestimate any character at any given moment during a game's lifespan. In Season 1 of Tekken 7, Feng Wei was a rather awkward character. He had amazing neutral like he does today, and had great pokes and, all the stuff you know Feng Wei for. However, he had one fatal issue in Tekken 7, which was his screw game was non-existent, and you had to rely on very awkward and weak screws to maximize your combo potential. And a lot of these screws would either be limiting with what combos you could do, and worst of all, they had very bad wall travel. This all changed in Season 3, when there was basically what I like to call the power creep update, where every character got a new screw. Feng Wei was granted down forward for 3. However, he wasn't really seen at all despite getting this insanely needed buff to the character. Well, I wouldn't say he needed it, but the character needed it to climb up the ranks and become the monster he was in Season 4. Fun fact about Feng in Season 2 and 3 is that I almost never saw any Feng Weis. I may have saw one Feng Wei throughout Season 2 and 3. He was that underplayed back in the day, and no one really understood the power he got when he received the screw buff. And this would become even more prevalent as he would get buffed again in Season 4, and with the new screw he was given, he basically became an unstoppable character and would eventually win EVO in 2022 thanks to Knee. And you can pretty much boil all of this down to this new screw given to Feng Wei. It became such a problem. Feng Wei had some of the highest damage in the game thanks to this screw, and had a emergency nerf patch just to cater to the ongoing hate people had for Feng Wei for just completely dominating the meta during Season 4. Now, the placements of all of these can be debated and argued, and I think everyone can have their own unique and interesting take on where all of these moves would be placed. But if there's one thing I think everyone can agree upon, the next entry on this list is easily, hands down, the most controversial buff in Tekken 7 history. And as of writing this, you can even argue it being the most controversial change in Tekken's history, at least through patch notes. This, of course, goes to none other than the tracking buff. When FAHKUMRAM was released, FAHKUMRAM was an absolute nightmare of a character. But there was another nightmare that people were too busy crying and screaming about on Twitter for a long bit of time. For some reason, they decided to give all the Mishimas a tracking buff to their hell sweep, making it to the point where the move was essentially homing. This outraged the entire Tekken community and even outraged Mishima players, arguing this completely dumbed down the character. The whole point of a wave dash, after all, is to make your hell sweep realign, giving it tracking. If it already has built-in tracking, then there is quite literally no point to wave dash at all if you think about it. This was complained about so much, as a matter of fact, that a emergency patch note was released and both Kazuya and Devil Jin had their hell sweeps reverted back to what they used to be. Interestingly, however, Heihachi kept his on his first hell sweep for some reason, and it gave him a very strong low that he surprisingly needed. Heihachi always had a very weak low game, often relying on risking it all with hell sweep or a down back 2 here and there. However, it kind of became an interesting meta with Heihachi to just spam the first kick of the hell sweep, as it left Heihachi +8 on hit, and it had very long range and was extremely fast for a +8 on hit low. And even though it looks like he's crouching, he's actually standing, so he can go for pretty much whatever he wants in this +8 situation. Now, he is still launch punishable, but the fact that this is pretty much homing and +8, this is a very strong low that Heihachi surprisingly needed. While it didn't help him win any major events, this was still a very nice change to Heihachi, although it is still weird that Heihachi of all the characters kept it for some reason. But it is what it is, and it is actually still in Tekken 8 to this very day. And Heihachi is the only person to give us a reminder of one of the most controversial moments in Tekken's history. But the real question remains, when Tekken 8 is all said and done, which game will have been more controversial? Which game is going to be better balanced? I guess that's all up for time to tell, and when the time does come, I do plan on making a video comparing the two games and their controversies to see which game was really better or worse. Anyways, that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I thought about making this video for a while and didn't know a good time to make it, so I thought this was kind of the best time to make an interesting video like this. So I hope you enjoy it. Take care, and I'll see you soon.